Hello and welcome to this week's COVID-19 Shared Mobility Briefing. I'm Venkatesh Gopal from MoveMe. I'm very happy to announce that I'm joined by Jacob Greig, Vice President at Lyft Tango, Elliot Semitaki, Vice President of Innovation at RideShark, and Flo Develene, CEO and co-founder of Paparide. Thank you all for joining. Health and distancing concerns have been emerging as the number one top of the mind factor when it comes to shared mobility. We've seen this in our survey in Vancouver. Pre-COVID, it was convenience. In the carpooling context, how would you say has the pandemic reshaped the business or operating model, say customer perceptions or policies or guidelines around carpooling? Jacob, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's changed things in a number of ways, and some things have probably stayed true. So I think if we think about what's driving the need for carpool, some of the things stay true from before. There is a desire to reduce congestion and reduce parking pressure on site, and everything that we're seeing is indicating that people are suddenly not very comfortable to get on public transit and want to drive on their own. So we may see a lot more cars on our road, and that's a challenge. So that challenge stays true, but then the reasons to carpool for commuters has changed somewhat, and the concerns and the things that they need to look at. So whereas before it was around, as you said, convenience and maybe saving some money and doing the right thing for the environment, it's been replaced by sort of necessity and trust and concerns around safety. So we're seeing that people generally across the world feel that getting in a car with somebody that they know or have some connection with is a safer option than getting on a bus or a train as they see it. And so suddenly carpool has emerged as the next safest option to driving on our own. And so it takes on a real just a need that's sort of driven from a necessity. And it's kind of interesting if you look at, I was looking at the history of carpooling. Carpooling really first came to prominence in World War II as a response to a shortage and a scarcity and a challenge around resources. It peaked again in the oil crisis, again, a shortage and a necessity. And so maybe we're seeing now an opportunity to give it another burst of life because we've got this huge amount of disruption and need and necessity, which, as we know, is kind of the mother of invention and a change in behaviours. So it's as important as ever, maybe more, but there are some different factors that need to be considered in making people comfortable to do it.
And talking about carpooling, I know RideShark has been recently involved in a lot of innovation around carpooling, vanpooling, and I know, Elliot, you had certain points related to the CDC guidelines. Would you like to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, our team at RideShark helps to support mostly enterprise customers, whether those are corporate customers, campus-based customers like universities and colleges, or, public organizations and public transit agencies. And, from our perspective, pick up on many of Jacob's points. Obviously, health and safety is an imperative right now. And so many of our existing clients are looking at how they can, enable their stakeholders to travel safely. And so we've certainly been sharing, whether it's CDC guidelines for our US-based customers, Health Canada guidelines for our Canadian customers, providing that high-level guidance in terms of what types of safe practices there may be for carpooling. And so, that typically means, mandatory masks for all people. Usually we're encouraging, only one passenger in the vehicle at a time just to maintain social distancing. And obviously reducing touch points and increasing sanitization from the driver's perspective. Those are the high level sort of bits of guidance that we're providing. And I'd say, as Jacob mentioned, that this is a window of opportunity as people's, travel behavior and their perceptions change. That carpooling, could grow as a mode choice for transit and travel. And so we're just trying to provide that guidance so that all of our different types of customers feel comfortable and confident that they can continue to use carpooling and continue to promote carpooling as a safe form of transportation, just like any other form of transportation that is currently, undergoing challenges and trying to find that balance between convenience, cost, and safety. And obviously, safety is the number one priority. And so providing that guidance is what we're doing to help our customers enable that continued use of carpooling as an option.
Right. Flo, quickly to go through not just inside a city, but then even outside it to certain recreational trips. I use Poparide when I was out there and going about. I would love to know your thoughts on what has Poparide seen in the post-COVID and during this COVID, during summer, and then also your points on the health factor.
Well, it's been a interesting time to say the least, I think for everyone, whether they travel or not. At Poparide, we really focus on helping people travel together between cities through carpooling. And, at the early phases of the pandemic, people were told to stay at home. And so we saw a reduction in our activity of 95% in April, which was actually good news. It meant that we operate in Canada, so people in Canada respected the guidelines set out by government to stay at home and, not spread whatever this thing was, which is still something we're trying to figure out. And that was kind of like the freak out phase, I call it. It's like everyone was just like, what is going on? And so, of course, like we told everyone, just don't travel. We put big banners on our apps and websites to say, stay at home until we know what's going on. As things are developing now, it's becoming clear that there's a balance to be reached between, keeping people safe, but also allowing people to travel. Travel is not just a want. It's not something that you do, hey, I want to go somewhere. It's like, I need to go somewhere. I got to go and visit my folks in the next city or in the next neighborhood, or, I got to go to the hospital, like whatever it is. And so people have to travel. And what's becoming clear for us now is that, a lot of people are a lot more comfortable sharing a car with a couple of other people than they are being on a plane or being on a bus or being on a train where, you have to go to the train station, you have to be exposed to people in a bus station and so on. And actually reducing the amount of people that you're exposed to in these difficult times is not a bad strategy as a consumer. And so, we're seeing a pickup of people using carpooling as a way to get around, which is good news. But we also, we're a bit worried. We're monitoring what's going on and giving people really strict guidelines about wearing masks and giving them everything they need to do the right thing. But really strongly monitoring to make sure we're not, the cause of potentially some spread of the virus. So it's a real balance to be achieved, but the bottom line is people need to move around. And so, we're essentially an essential service and we've got to keep going and keep offering this type of service to people.
Yeah, totally agree. It's more focused on need-based than a want-based now, which leads me to a buzzword that we've been talking about in this during COVID and post-COVID era, distancing bubble. So physical distancing bubble. So is that favorable to carpooling? How does that help in business operations now more than ever? Is there something that could work for carpooling? I know, Flo, you mentioned it's carpooling. People are more comfortable carpooling with a few number of people than in traveling in a bus or a train or a plane. So how about putting this in perspective with carpooling and the social distancing bubble? Elliot, do you have anything from your side that you've seen?
Yeah, no, and I'd pick up on Flo and Jacob's points from before. I mean, certainly, in March and April, we saw a big dramatic drop, and again, that was, I think, a good sign that people were following orders. Things have started to pick up again, and in fact, we're sort of starting to see an uptick in interest from a number of different types of enterprise customers that are, I think, looking at transportation, frankly, differently than they did before. if you were a corporate, a company with a campus, many of our conversations we're having now are, something to the effect of, I wasn't so worried about how my people got to my door. They just got to my door, and then, we started from when they get in the door. And now, transportation is a fundamental operational issue for college campuses, university campuses, companies, public transit agencies. And so that idea of a sort of trusted network that you're traveling with only a handful of people, you're reducing the exposure, as Flo said. I think that's a key component of trust that's being built into networks through carpooling rather than taking other forms of transportation in the city. And so that is part of the uptick in interest that we've seen over the last, let's say, 1 to 2 months, as companies start to come back online and as there's a return to work, a return to school. The other major component for us is a lot of customers come to us because they have a fixed parking footprint. And this idea that everyone is going to be able to sort of purchase their own vehicle and drive into work, as nice as that sounds, that creates the transportation and congestion challenge that Jacob mentioned, obviously the environmental and sustainability challenge, but also our customers don't have unlimited parking. And so getting as many people into their office using multiple different modes, including carpooling, is a real option that they're looking at. And so for us, there's been this sort of interesting, we got hit pretty hard like everybody else, and now we're sort of seeing maybe there's a window of opportunity here, which is why we're pushing sort of safe carpooling as a really strong option for a number of different transit modes that we see in the city.
That's a great point you mentioned that, because parking's not planned, and then it cannot be created out of
That's
while
right.
we come out of all this. So, Jacob, Flo, have you also dealt with that kind of a problem, which is pushing people towards, exploring shared mobility than going, with their own cars?
I guess I'll just talk because it probably echo from Elliot from the corporate and sort of organisational focus that we have, which I think Flo will add a great colour around sort of more in the community, getting the general public to carpool. I think what we've found, it's always difficult to get people to break a habit of driving on their own. Cars are well marketed and well bred into us from a behavioural point of view, particularly in North America, Australia as well. Less so in Europe. And I guess there's some interesting things we need to look at. So how do we make it really easy for people to carpool, which has always been a challenge? As we said now, the increased focus on it being safe, that was always there. And a big part of that, what it was before was trust a lot, is what we found with organisations and corporates. And we've seen between even the open carpool networks that are focused on corporates and the more closed networks like what we do and what RideShark does, even in those open networks pre-COVID, 80 to 90% of the matches that they were finding for the daily commute were people who worked at the same organisation.
Yeah.
So that desire to create your own network, even when you've got the possibility not to, in the daily commute has always been there. And I think it will probably become even more important for the day-to-day commute now. And I guess, Flo, I think from your perspective, you're probably seeing it, you've got to challenge it in a different way, I guess. But what are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, it's a bit different because
Yeah.
we can't really control bubbles because, we're essentially matching strangers together in cars to get from, let's say, Montreal to Toronto. And so they don't know each other. They don't have many friends in common, or if any. And so, the stance we're taking is really following government guidelines. And, I was on a plane recently, and the plane was packed, and I wore a mask, and everybody wore a mask, and everybody screened at the airport, and you take a bit of a chance, but you take your precautions. And I think the power of having a platform, because people carpool anyway, right? Like, it's not just through Poparide or RideShark and Lyft and Go. It's people will share rides. But when you have a platform, you have the power to communicate how to use the platform. And so we're really honing in on the whole communication aspect of, how should you carpool in this weird time, and what are the precautions that you should be taking, and how can we help you if something does happen? For example, if there is there hasn't been yet, but if there is a case of someone who has COVID and infects a bunch of people in a car, we can do contact tracing, which will help also reduce the impact of this virus that is nobody's fault. But, we can help in the process of making sure that it does get contained if it does happen. So it's hard. It's hard because, again, like we're really focusing on the needs, and we're telling people only travel if you need to, not if you want to, which is hard because we want people to use our platform, but it's not the right thing to say. We can't market, go to the next city with a bunch of strangers if you want to party with your friends, which kind of brings us to the next topic of universities, right? Because that's what students do, because that's not the right thing to do. So we tell them, look, if you need to travel, you can use our service. Otherwise, please stay at home.
True. Yeah, and a very important point that you make is distancing bubble could also help you trace contacts and then measure, a date on a day-to-day or a trip-to-trip basis as to how safe it was and how to even quarantine the vehicle and then take care of that. And you mentioned about universities. Before that, I think I wanted to hit this point specifically. And then I think Jacob would be more equipped to answer this point as to carpooling for kids, school kids. How can you clear the doubts in parents' minds to allow such a service to take off again? Or if it's a new service that they are adopting to, because of the change in work from home and all that, how does that favor or how do you put down the fear of changing your earlier behavior of dropping off your kids into a carpooling behavior? Jacob?
So I guess, you go back to, one of the original things that pre-COVID technology was helping with this process. So carpooling has been an organic process that people have been doing for a long time, particularly at school. Like, next door neighbor takes the kids to school. This is age-old thing. The problem with that is it's quite restrictive in terms of you can only match with the people that you've managed to meet, and therefore, in a traditional, non-technology enabled carpooling situation, you may have one or two pairs is what we found people have. When you bring in technology, that number of pairs that you have doubles or triples, so therefore the potential for carpooling triples. And that still stays true. But then if you go, okay, so if we're going to have more people potentially carpooling with each other, how do we maintain that safety? Schools are really interesting because you first of all got to make sure that the parents have total control over the booking process, but that was common before. But then with schools, and all schools are really figuring out how to return or not to return to school. I've heard some where they're doing 1 week on, 1 week off, all these types of things. A new reality that's kicked in as to why carpooling's become really urgent, and suddenly we've got a lot of schools asking us about it, is if there was a school bus before, it has to run at half capacity, and that's really challenging. They can't just go and buy twice as many buses, so suddenly there's a lot more kids that may need to be driven to school. You then compound that with the fact that a lot of parents aren't having to travel to work anymore. They're working from home. And so what was a convenient thing to drop the kids off on the way has suddenly become quite an inconvenient extra trip that they need to do. So that's sort of we've seen an increased interest in carpool. But I think one of the key things is what the technology needs to do is mimic what people are doing at the moment. So as Flo said, as people are starting to realize life has to go on in some way, they're creating their own bubbles. So they're deciding there's this many people in my social network that I'm okay with being exposed to because I need to, and that's my level of risk that I'm happy with. That's where technology can enable that sort of a thing to happen as well with your carpooling, where, through our app and many others, you can create a network of parents that you would like to and are open to carpool matching with, and you can control it to within that sub network. And so that sort of level of control, we think, is really important for people in addressing the safety piece, and will become even more so. And as Flo and Elliot said, the data becomes even more important. So if something happens, if somebody gets COVID in the school population, everybody is then going to want to contact trace and see who have they had contact with. And with every single trip being logged in real time, we know who matched, we know where they moved from, all of that data is there. It can support that in the event of someone, getting COVID. So I think those things will become increasingly important.
Great. So yeah, now I hear that confirms our idea of like carpooling is not just safe but more convenient and more relevant now, and it could be the one thing that people flock to when it comes to carpooling for school kids, for the schools. Flo, you mentioned about universities and colleges. How does that differ, and how does that idea not change?
Well, it's hard to say because there's just so many different approaches being taken for universities and colleges throughout Canada, at least, and many other countries. And a lot of students are not going back to campus, and that was a big market for us, was helping students get back to their parents during the weekend and for bank holidays and so on. But the reality is, again, like, we're social animals and we have a need to connect with our peers. And so, I think that's going to continue, but I think it's definitely going to be less so as people are conscious that they need to constrain their social bubble to, a reasonable amount of individuals. And from what we can see, again, the reduction in traffic among students indicates that people do understand that they can't just go about living their lives the same way that they used to. So, what we can do is influence them to do the right thing again, and then it's kind of up to them, because like we deal with the general public because we're a consumer platform. So the biggest advantage of people using a platform again is potential contact tracing after the fact, and potentially if things get bad, we can also close the platform and educate people that it's just not okay to travel right now because it's too risky. So, with the scale that platforms like ours and others have, it enables us to have, some sort of influence on how people go about their travel business, because, there's a lot of information out there, and it's hard. Like, it's really hard to know what to say to people, and we have to follow up with what's going on, keep on track with what's going on in every different province in Canada, and potentially for cross-border trips into the States, and we do our best, but, ultimately it's really about people doing the right thing and us giving them the right information.
Yeah. Elliot, I know RideShark also has some use cases in terms of colleges and university sort of thing. While I ask you to address that a bit more, I would also want to see if Jacob mentioned earlier that it's hard to break a habit. So what if it's the other way around? It's hard to break a habit of being used to carpooling or sharing a ride, and then going back to your own car. How does that fit? The reverse of getting away from owning a car right now.
Yeah.
How does that fit in? And then the other point is also, how do you see that being very much relevant in the colleges side?
Yeah, it's a good question, and university and college campuses are, they're a key segment for us. And right now there's a fair bit of interest, especially from US-based colleges and universities that are actually returning to campus, some of them for the fall semester, some of them for the winter semester. I would say the two main motivations that we're hearing from customers, one is that obviously, university students and college students don't always have cars available. And so public transit is a key mode of transit for them. our platform is a multimodal trip engine. And so, we enable active transportation, public transit, carpooling, van pooling, and others. And certainly, active transportation has grown really rapidly, which is, I think, a good sign. It's been a bit of a revelation, actually, for obvious reasons, but that's been great. But for a lot of college students, driving their cars is not necessarily an option. And so, if public transit in a particular municipality, especially a smaller municipality where the public transit may not have been very robust to begin with, if that service no longer really properly serves the college and university campus ecosystem, they have a major problem. And so a carpooling solution is one where those individuals that are able to drive can drive, they can follow safe guidelines, they can obviously defray the cost of their trip, and they can provide safe travel options for their peers. And that whole idea of a trusted network is really key for college campuses, because there is that social element that's so important to being part of a college and university community. The other piece, as both of Flo and Jacob have mentioned, is about the data. And I think colleges and universities, as they roll out this type of platform, they want to make sure that they are on top of things, and that they're providing the tools and options to allow for the safe return of their ecosystem and their stakeholders. And so in some instances, those colleges are just limiting the platform to students. In others, it's students, staff, and faculty. And our customers, it's their platform. They can use it how they want. They own the data. It's their terms and conditions. And so we're providing the guidance, obviously, to enable them to use it safely. But it's really up to them to determine who they want to be using it. Do they want students to potentially share with staff and faculty, or do they want those to be separate? We can separate it. But that's the approach that we've taken for those universities and colleges that are returning to school. It is a challenge, and it's something that we're monitoring very closely to make sure that there is that safety and that guidance there to ensure that we're doing our best to enable safe travel for all of our stakeholders.
Yeah. Is there, while you enable those kind of measures and guidelines, is there also some kind of a guideline picking up in carpooling, like how it is in ride hailing now? Uber and Lyft have these guidelines as to the drivers should be rolling down their windows when they're traveling with passengers. So does carpooling also have that kind of a
Certainly,
guideline?
that's part of the CDC guidelines, is to roll down the windows wherever possible. Yeah. Obviously, in Canada, as we get into the fall and the winter, that's going to be an increasing challenge. But certainly, that's part of the guidance. Is roll down the windows, reduce the touch points as much as possible. The other thing, and I think Flo mentioned it, that's really important is, obviously many individuals, if they're not in a closed carpool, are potentially strangers, but they're communicating with each other, and they're getting a sense of that individual, and they are setting the sort of parameters around which they're comfortable traveling. And so that's, again, us providing the guidance. But then, we're encouraging all users to say, hey, before I, start this carpool, I want you to know it's required that you wear a mask. It's required, that you take, and I'm only going to be carrying one passenger. That individuals using should be responsible and make sure that they're using it, and that we're providing the tools, the communication tools, whether it's within app or through our marketing and promotions, to ensure that we're providing that guidance to enable that type of safe carpooling.
Awesome. I think with technology and the drive to move sustainably, at the same time, certain restrictions which do not allow corporates, colleges, schools to just, double up the school buses or double up parking lots or those kind of assets that they would be looking to expand if they wanted to go the individual car ownership way. I think carpooling has a great use case in every mode that we see. Great conversation, guys. I could think of a few points to take away from this interview. Personally, I would like to have each of you share with us top 3 takeaways from your side in terms of what the viewers could hang on to and then use to sort of, douse the fire when it comes to carpooling questions. So, starting off with you, Jacob, what would your three takeaways be?
Three takeaways. I think, I guess the first one is this is an opportunity to reset behaviour towards what you'd like it to be. So for organisations and universities that were trying to break, significantly higher driver loan rates, this is an opportunity to reset that, and that reset should look at all modes that you would prefer, from the active modes to teleworking, all those things that would be more beneficial to our communities and to our infrastructure. So I think that's the first thing, is this is an opportunity to reset. So revisit the data and take that opportunity. I think the second thing would be the importance of data. So data in planning. So this is a chance, again, look at where your people live, look at how they're traveling, look at how their travel is being affected by COVID, and plan the different modes accordingly that you're going to promote to them. And carpool will be one of the things that you should look at, but be more targeted in it so that you can, because there's a need right now that you can address with it, so you'll get a more sort of open audience. And then I think the third piece is use technology that helps this whole process run better. And what does better mean? It's more convenient to find matches. It's easier to control and create trust and safety. And thirdly, that you've got an ability to link it seamlessly to the sorts of rewards and incentives that you'd want to give people to keep them and get this habit of carpooling going. So I guess that's my three big things that I'd be focusing on as an organisation or a university at the moment.
Awesome. Flo, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I'm a very practical person, so I'm just going to give some practical insights, I guess, on this situation. And it's kind of what we tell our, almost 300,000 members is like, follow the guidelines as they're set out by your local authorities and stay on top of, the situation, and be sure to know what's changing in your area and just be aware of what the rules are. That's really number one. Number two is, I think during this time, is if you have to travel, only do so if you don't have any symptoms and if you're feeling well. If you're sick, stay at home and don't take the risks. It's just not worth it. And if you do travel, make sure you wear a mask, that you keep good airflow in the vehicle, that you don't touch other passengers or shake hands or do any of the usual stuff. Like, we'll get back to that. Just don't do it for now because it's just not worth the risk. Keep people safe. And, the third is, in the unfortunate event that someone does catch COVID before, during, after your trip, it will happen. Like, there's cases every day, and these things do happen. And if it does happen, just be transparent and tell the people that you traveled with, or tell the platform if you did it through a platform, so that people can, stay at home and confine and quarantine and get tested and do everything they need to do to confine the virus. So that's really the three practical steps: is like, know what's going on, 2, follow the rules, and 3, be transparent. And my outlook on this is, I strongly believe this is just a glitch in the matrix. It's a moment in time that will be written in history books one day, and people will be like, oh, look, there was a pandemic in 2020. Like, they speak about the Spanish flu now, but there was a world before, and there will be a world after. So, as an entrepreneur, like, I look at the long term, and people are going to keep traveling and carpooling or ride sharing or ride hailing or whatever they do. That's going to keep happening. And so, like, we have to keep our heads down and keep providing, good systems for people to get around. And in this time, we have to focus on the safety, and we will.
Great. And finally, Elliot.
Yep, that's hard. Great points by two other speakers, so I'm probably going to regurgitate some of what's already been said. I mean, obviously, for me, first is the obvious: safety first. Just make sure that you're following the rules, following the guidelines, and taking your own precaution as you travel. The second one is probably more sort of for enterprise or organizations, is that transportation is now a fundamental operational issue for your business, for your university, for your campus, for your public transit agency. And so it's going to be treated differently. And that means, that you've got to enable individuals to have the tools and options in their hands to travel safely and to get back to work. And then finally, we didn't talk about it that much, but sort of incentives and rewards. That's an area where, if you really want to, come out of this stronger, which is what a lot of people are saying, that means, providing the tools and the incentives to enable people to travel differently. And so using the data that you're gathering, but also providing meaningful rewards and incentives like are being done in lots of other industries. It hasn't really hit transportation and mobility as much, but I think we're about to see a wave of incentivizing particular behaviors, particular mode choices, in order to improve service and find the types of outcomes that are optimal for everybody. And so we're absolutely on board with that. It's great to see such a strong community of companies both here in Canada and around the world. And obviously, thanks to your team at MoveMe for having us and initiating this conversation, because I think we need more of that. We need to enable more of it, and I know all of our teams are certainly available for further conversation or questions should anything else come up.
True. So there you have it. Top 3 could be data and planning to enable contact tracing, follow local guidelines, safety first, and then incentivize and reward, which would reset behaviors in the long term. So that's something that we can take away from today's interview. Thank you, Jacob, Elliot, and Flo for joining us today, and thank you all for tuning in. If you have any questions for the task force, we would be happy to hear, and we'll try to solve those issues. Take care and stay safe.